Good morning, men. Well, we're here in the Ten Commandments because we are building a biblical worldview, and a biblical worldview needs some structure to it. So we're going back to the moral created order that God has made, that He's never rescinded. In fact, Jesus came and talked about keeping the commandments, keeping the word, fulfilling what God originally intended, and not putting all the barnacles of all the legalism and Pharisaism on the law, but going back to the heart of it so that we could live it. And also, He fulfilled that law, so we don't do it out of guiltiness and trying to earn our place with God. We do it from a state of sonship, saying, I want to live this way. And now we're on the fourth commandment. You'll be glad to hear this is the final week on the fourth commandment. We're moving on, but the next one is a challenge. You know what the fifth commandment is? Honor your father and your mother. And for some of us in this room, that's going to be a major challenge. And for all of us, it should be something that we work at. But we'll talk about that next week. Well, God will never give you more than you can handle. Agree? I disagree with that. God regularly gives you more than you can handle. I think it's a well-meant, comforting statement. You know, when you're down in the pit and you don't know what's going on and somebody comes and says, you know, God will never give you more than you can handle. And inside you're going, oh yeah? Well, I'm not handling this all so well. I need something else besides myself. There we go. Can you hear me now? All right. Good morning. God will regularly give us more or allow more than we can handle. And so that's one of those phrases in Christendom that we need to combat. It's not good theology because it basically says you are self-sufficient, you just don't know it yet. No, I'm not self-sufficient. I have all kinds of things in my life where I need help. And so when I think about that, I regularly face things from the outside and I face things from the inside. I need to reconnect and reestablish my union with Christ. And that's why the Sabbath is given. The Sabbath, in part, is given so that we regularly stop and remember who we are and who God is. So here's the fourth commandment. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. And you know that it goes on to talk about you're to rest your animals, you're to rest your wife, you're to rest your children. You're not to get the work done by some other means. Just stop. And the core issue in the Sabbath for me is trust. If I stop working, will God provide for me? Not only materially, but will He provide for me a sense of satisfaction, a sense of accomplishment that I'm addicted to? Will He provide for me in such a way if I rest? Yesterday I needed a Sabbath. I was just troubled. I couldn't figure out what was going on inside of me. And so I took a mini Sabbath. I just took a walk and deliberately thought of it as, okay, Lord, this is a mini sabbatical, just you and me. I'm not listening to anything. I'm just walking and talking with the Lord. And it really helped me out. So the spiritual journey is simple. We just keep moving, right? But it's complex because it's long and it's bumpy and things keep changing and we need fuel. We need fuel for the journey. So just think about a journey. When you're on a journey, you get tired. You need fuel. Sometimes you get lost or confused. Sometimes you need to be reoriented. Sometimes you need to get out and get a breath of fresh air. So just think about a journey, and on a spiritual journey, you need the same kinds of things. You need renewal. Sometimes we need healing. We need refocus. In our journey with God, we need forgiveness and cleansing. We need hope. Sometimes we get stuck. Sometimes we feel like a failure. Sometimes we need assurance. And this is what the Sabbath is all about. It's not about keeping some kind of religious rule. It's about getting resupplied. And that's what the Sabbath is all about. So a couple things to review, and then I want to challenge you to look at your own way that you take a Sabbath, the way that you structure it into your life. And I hope it'll be a liberating exercise for you this morning to maybe see some ways that God has made you and that you can enjoy this Sabbath journey. So first of all, the Sabbath is a Sabbath to the Lord, and that's the phrase that keeps grabbing me. It's a Sabbath to the Lord. It's not just a Sabbath away from work, although that's part of its function, but it's meant to be away from work and toward the Lord. And here's what Paul writes about his connection with God and what he wants for us in Ephesians chapter 3, verse 14. For this reason I bow my knees before the Lord, from whom every family in heaven and on earth is named, that according to the riches of his glory, he may grant you to be strengthened with power through his Spirit in your inner being. See, that's unto the Lord. So that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you being rooted and grounded in love may have strength to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. When I read those verses, and this is my favorite prayer in the whole New Testament, because it's universally applicable. Whether I'm praying for my own sin or whether I'm praying for somebody's health, there's something here. And it talks about love and it talks about fullness. It talks about the connection. So when we think about the Sabbath, we need to think about, how do I reconnect? How can that union with Christ be mine again? And I love these words, to comprehend the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know. And that's the word experiential knowledge. That word know is epigenosko. It's the intensive kind of knowledge that says, how can I know it experientially? And that's what the Sabbath is for. And we've got to get away from our multitasking in order to enter that space. So the Sabbath is to the Lord. And the Sabbath is about relationship, not mission. It's about relationship. In 1 Thessalonians 4:11, Paul says, aspire to live quietly and to mind your own affairs. You know, he knows that not everybody that he's seeing in the living church is going to be an apostolic church planter. You know, Paul is a great model to us of sacrifice and dedication, but that doesn't mean that you are called to be an itinerant evangelist without a family and without, a steady income. Paul tells the Thessalonians, go get a job and aspire to live a quiet and peaceful life. Now, he doesn't mean a life that never speaks of Christ, because the gospel was ringing out from them, it says in 1 Thessalonians 1. It doesn't mean in this quiet life that we're meek and we never speak and we never stand up. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about an internal quietness that is in your soul. And to me, what I see here is mind your own affairs. What he means is do your particular job, your particular setting, represent Christ where you are. I think he means we're the living church out there. You have an assignment. You have a network. Live a quiet life internally with Christ and influence the people around you. You know the story of Mary and Martha? That Jesus visited their home, and Martha was scurrying around and was busy and complained about her sister Mary, who was just sitting at the feet of Jesus and listening to him. And she was complaining, going, Martha was saying, why don't you tell Mary to get busy and help host this party? And Jesus says, well, actually, Martha, Mary has chosen the better part here. She's listening to me. Now, many times I've heard Martha picked on as a result of that, saying, see, you shouldn't be busy. You should be this contemplative person sitting at the feet of Jesus. And of course that's a good thing. But later on, you see Martha, she's again serving, but it's coming from a different place. Instead of serving to get the approval of Jesus, she's serving from a full center. Because serving is her natural love language. So Jesus is not saying, squelch your industry, squelch your ambition. What he's saying is, bring it to me from a different place. So he didn't try to change Martha into Mary. He simply said, I want you to serve me from a different place. And so the Sabbath is about relationship, not about mission. And the Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Remember the story about Jesus. He's walking with his disciples through a wheat field, and they were plucking the heads of grain and eating them as they walked. And the Pharisees saw this, and according to their rules, not only was the walking longer than a Sabbath day's journey, but they were harvesting on the Sabbath because they were picking the grains. And so they came to Jesus and said, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath? And this is where Jesus says, listen, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, which is a turnaround of focus. And he says this in verse 27. And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord, even of the Sabbath. And I think in that phrase, he's Lord of the Sabbath, that's one of the places that Christ followers find some freedom. If Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath, then he's Lord over the timing of that as well. And that's why one of the reasons we worship him on the first day of the week. That's many ways our Sabbath. So I want to ask you this question. How was the Sabbath made for me? Not me for the Sabbath, but how is it made for me? So what's your spiritual prescription? And I just want to put in this one suggestion. All right? This is not a legalism, but I think that most of you men in this room could actually begin to practice a Sabbath in a very simple way. And that is, remember with the Jews, when did they start their Sabbath? Friday night at 5 o'clock or so at sundown. Probably 6 o'clock. They lived in a temperate zone where it's pretty much 6 a.m. is the sunrise and 6 p.m. was the sunset. So they started at sundown on Friday evening. How did they start? With a meal. They started with a meal. What could be more enjoyable than that? Sit down to a dinner that doesn't have an alarm clock to it. There's no agenda afterwards. So they sat down to a meal, usually with their extended family. And then when they got done with the meal, after lingering, what'd they do? They went to bed. And they slept 8 or 10 hours. They say the normal circadian rhythm, if you took away all the clocks, would be that we'd probably sleep 10 hours. I don't know the last time you slept 10 hours. I have other issues that make it impossible for me to sleep 10 hours, but I'm not telling what those are, but you might guess what they are. But there's a lot of rest here. So you start your day with a meal. You start with your senses just fulfilled in this wonderful meal. Then you rest, you sleep. That's the start of your Sabbath. So the first 12 to 14 hours of your Sabbath are all just the things we want. And then you rise in the morning and however they worshiped God. But for us, what if we did that on a Saturday night? Turned off our media, maybe had some friends over, but just as a family, we had a meal and we just rested. And then Sunday morning, we have a great cup of coffee, we have some quiet time, we come to worship the Lord and spend our day a little bit differently. I think that's really within reach of most of the men in this room. To transform the Sabbath into starting with rest, coming to worship. And some of you can't do that because of your schedules. We realize that, and that's why we need to adapt this. But I would just suggest that's one of the ways you could get a significant Sabbath every single week. 52 weeks a year, rest day like that. Well, how was the Sabbath made for me? I'm going to be borrowing this out of a book called Sacred Pathways by Gary Thomas, which when I read it, it was so liberating for me because there's no generic prescription for how you could best make the Sabbath a delight. Part of the reason that we have resistance to the Sabbath is because somebody told us, this is what you must do. And you felt like you were wearing a straitjacket in doing that. It just took all the adventure and fun and squelched who you are. And Gary Thomas gives us 9 sacred pathways. Now, these are not pathways to God like some new religion. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about pathways of worship. And I'm going to only give you 8 because one of them is not very quiet. It's called the activist, and we'll leave him behind. But how many of you have ever taken a temperament test? You know, Myers-Briggs or something like that. When I did that years ago, that was an eye-opener for me. I think we tend to not know ourselves very well. And Myers-Briggs has basically 8 different types. It has, are you introverted or extroverted? Are you sensing? In other words, do you assess evidence and empirical things, or are you intuitive? Are you thinking or feeling in terms of your basic temperament? And are you judging, meaning do you need closure, or are you perceiving, which means you're open to exploration? And when I took this, I said, that's why I should never be a senior pastor. Because every model that I had been shown of what an effective senior leader looks like was exactly the opposite of who I am. What I was shown is that a senior leader should be an extrovert. He should be heavy on evidence. He should be a sensing type. He should be a thinker, an intellectual, and he should be able to bring closure every place he goes. An ESTJ. Well, I'm an INFP. I'm an introvert. That's why you make me tired. No, I refuel alone. I refuel in quietness. I need that. I long for that. I'm an intuitive, which means I use evidence. The intuitives don't lack evidence. It's just that I can do 1, 2, 3, 9. You know, I don't need to see the whole sequence. I tend to draw conclusions based on the evidence I have, and I leap ahead. I'm a feeler. I was trained in seminary to be a thinker, and I'm a thinker. I can do that, but I tend to identify and empathize. And so I tend to make decisions more on feeling than on thinking. And then I'm a P. I'm a perceiver. I don't mind not coming to a conclusion, and it drives some of my brothers crazy because I'm always. Let's explore this a little more. And that's the hardest part for me in preaching is I'm still exploring. I don't want to draw it to a conclusion. So the hard part for me is on Fridays and Saturdays to throw out the 80% that I've discovered over the week. So I'm an INFP. That's why I'm so mysterious to my wife and hard for people to understand. Now, you have your own temperament. I'm just giving you an illustration. So that's how I came out of the womb. Now, that temperament, my temperament can be sinful and selfish, just like yours. But the point is, you have a temperament. You have a basic wiring. And we have instruments that can kind of help us see ourselves. But you need to feed your spiritual hunger based on the way you're wired. And that should be a tremendous sense of freedom for you. Now, that can be used selfishly too. Like, well, this is who I am and I'm not going to change. No, that's not the point. The point is that you have a certain longing And you know it when you're in it. And it refreshes you. And it brings you, and it can be used as a way to recognize, oh yeah, this is how I would best connect with God. If I'm fed the way He has wired me. Well, there are 4 elements that don't change, and there's these 4. You're to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. So my temperament or your temperament does not excuse me from entering these other areas and growing in them. But I'm talking here about the Sabbath. How on my journey do I find refreshment, resupply? How can I be myself with God? How can I find a way to speak a love language to Him? How can I allow Him to refresh me? That's what this is about. And a lot of it has to do with how you're wired. So don't baptize your temperament as being fixed or unchanging, but I'm just giving you permission to enjoy some aspects of God's provision for you that you may not have noticed. So I'm going to give you 8 sacred pathways. I'm going to just borrow some words out of Gary Thomas's book to describe them, and you have them in your notes, and there may be 1 or 2 or 3 of these that you go, that's me. Or there may be 2 or 3 of them you just cross out and go, I just can't do that. That just doesn't do it for me. Now, and there's going to be all across the board in here, and so that's why we have to live in unity. But it's also a reason to see why we have so many different types of churches. Because a church attracts a certain type of temperament of persons. Well, anyway, let's walk through it. You've got the list in front of you, and maybe check a couple that you think, okay, that's me, and I need to find tools and ways to welcome God into my life through using this. So the first one is the naturalist. These believers would prefer to leave the building. Let's get outside. I'm in a Bible study with a guy who does a lot of hunting and fishing and takes veterans on turkey shoots and does some things for handicapped people. And he will do anything to get outside, and that's his love language to God. And I've heard so many tales of guys saying, sitting in the deer stand, just looking at nature, I look forward to that all year long. Not just because I'm away from my wife. No. No, just it feeds. And I think it feeds a lot of men. Now, again, we can use that as an excuse. I never need to go into a church building. I can worship God outdoors. No, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is you may need a way to let God clearly proclaim to you who He is in nature. And Psalm 19 and Psalm 8 talks about that. David was one of those men. He longed to get outdoors. So that's the naturalist, and you may be longing for that, and especially with springtime coming, it's a way for you to worship the Lord. So how do you enjoy that? Find a way to do that. The sensate is loving God with the senses. A sensate Christian wants to be lost in the awe, the beauty, and the splendor of God. And they're drawn, this is my wife, they're drawn to the liturgical, the majestic, to architecture. It's why so many former Lutherans have a hard time being a Baptist. Because Lutherans spend a lot of money on stained glass windows. And different, if you notice that, Lutherans have really interesting architecture in their buildings. And Baptists are so utilitarian. We just block off the light and just focus on the pulpit, But some people come, this church is so ugly. I mean, there's no beauty here. I'm not knocking Berean. I'm just saying many people need the sensate. They love the sights, the sounds, the smells. It helps them worship God. Philip Keller wrote the book, A Shepherd Looks at the 23rd Psalm, and he was a sensate person. And he writes about a time when he was in college, and he lived in this dreary old dorm, and he was stuck in this place, but he played the violin, and so he found that if he would listen to music for an hour a day, it just lifted his spirit. And so often we find A sensate person needs the stimulation of art and they love the liturgy because it all weaves things together. And so a lot of us are going, you know. Other people are going, I love this. And that may be you. The traditionalist. These Christians are fed by what are often termed historic dimensions of faith, ritual, symbol, and sacrament. And they love the disciplined life. They love the regularity of it. They love regular church service, regular ways of praying, regular ways of keeping a prayer journal. They love the structure of it. And they don't necessarily like the peace and quiet of like a Quaker meeting where we're just waiting for the Lord to show up and say something. They want to have some things written down because they worship in that way. And you can see different traditions do that. I've been in some Anglican services where everything is structured and it's really beautiful. I don't know if I would like it every single week, but their prayers are all written out. There's not a lot of spontaneity, but the traditionalist loves that kind of regularity. How about the ascetic? Not the athletic, the ascetic. It's loving God in solitude and simplicity. The ascetic loves to be left alone, just to have quiet time. Nothing to distract them. No pictures, no music, no sound, nothing like that. Just go internal with God. And Michael Card might be one of these. The singer Michael Card, he admires the shaker kind of lifestyle, the simplicity of the Shakers. And he wrote a song, and it goes like this. Every heart needs to be set free from possessions that hold it so tight. Because freedom's not found in the things that we own. It's the power to do what is right. With Jesus our only possession, then giving becomes our delight. And we can't imagine the freedom we find from the things we leave behind. You can feel the draw towards simplicity in that. And of course, many of the hermitages and monasteries and the monks of the Middle Ages were drawn to this ascetic kind of life, a purposeful sort of austerity that reminds them that their relationship is only with God. And some of you can worship that way better than in other ways. Then there's the caregiver, loving God by loving others. You know, we have people on our prayer team, maybe some of you are on that, and they just love praying with people. It energizes them. And they find themselves in giving themselves away. What might make you tired energizes the caregiver. And their faith is built up by interacting with other people and praying with and for other people. It recharges them in doing so. And so they might spend part of their Sabbath going to a nursing home, or doing a small worship service for someone, or taking a meal to someone. That's how they worship the Lord. It's a beautiful thing. Then there's the enthusiast, loving God with mystery and celebration. And in other words, people who feel like, I really haven't connected with God unless I've experienced Him. And so I need to be a cheerleader for God. I want to stand up and shout amen. I want to sing to a full-throated worship song. And my heart isn't moved until I have felt some kind of celebration. And by the way, this is kind of the DNA running through many charismatic churches. And it's a healthy thing. It's a good thing. If you were at Commit this past weekend, you saw Jeff Deo, and man, he's energetic. And it's a celebrative kind of worshiping God. Then there's a contemplative, loving God through contemplation, that God is the one who loves me, and I want to spend time absorbing that love. These Christians seek to love God with the purest, deepest, and brightest love imaginable. And here I think about Mary, of the Martha and Mary duo, who just sat at the feet of Jesus and absorbed what he had to say. Or I think about John, the Apostle John, who was known as the Apostle of Love. You know, we don't hear him saying a whole lot in the New Testament, not like Peter, but he sat at the feet of Jesus, and Jesus knew that he loved him with his whole heart and entrusted his own mother to John at the cross. And then you have the intellectual, loving God with the mind. Intellectuals might be skeptics or committed believers, but in either case they are likely to be studying. And there's a part of me that was fed this way, especially when I was studying in seminary, that I was really fed, I was drawn closer to God by understanding a little bit more about some of the theological mysteries that I'd heard about. And when people like J.I. Packer or R.C. Sproul or other people unpacked some of that, it was worshipful for me. And so the intellectual feels closest to God when he or she is understanding him better. So you can't draw a line between quiet time and understanding for the intellectual, because they're always exploring and they're unpacking things. And thank God for intellectuals who help us delve down into languages and help us understand the intent of the written Word of God. Well, you have all of these. You've got the naturalist, the sensate, the traditionalist, the ascetic, the caregiver, the enthusiast, the contemplative, and the intellectual. Now, maybe you checked one or two of those going, you know, I need to explore that. Well, you could get this book and read a chapter on it, or you could just follow that thread and say, now, what is it about my worship life with God, my union with Him? Where have I experienced that the most? And there's probably an element of your own wiring that's wrapped inside of that. And what I want to encourage you today to do is, as you think about Sabbath, your refueling and your resupply that you need on a regular basis on your journey, what is it that naturally fits who you are? And explore more and more of that. Because there's probably two or three of these things that say, you know, that's within my wheelhouse. That's really what I love. And I may not be getting that as much when I go to church with the full body of Christ, but I can receive that on my own with God. And I can look for ways and tools to do that. And you may even find a friend who can mentor you or lead you or share with you. In fact, that may even happen here this morning. Somebody may have an example of what helps him have a Sabbath around who he is. So I want you to talk about this morning, because that's how you learn. That's how we take some things away. So I've got some questions for you, and I hope that you will be transparent with each other and share with each other some things you've learned along the journey. And you never know who you'll influence when you share that. So share amongst yourselves.